What is happening, guys? Welcome back, and if you're new here, welcome. My name is Ale, and today we are looking at 4 different ways to create objects in JavaScript. Now, objects form a big part of JavaScript, and it is very important to understand how to create them. So without any further delay, let's get into it. So the first way we're going to look at is by using object retros, and this is essentially a list of comma-separated key-value pairs inside curly braces. So let's create our first object using object retros. Const, let's create a user object, which is going to have a username property alarm, and it's going to have its online property set it to true. So we have already created our object called user, and we can log different properties to the console.log user.username, which should be alarm. Nice. So this was the first way to create objects in JavaScript. Looking at the second way, using constructor function. Now this is also called constructor invocation pattern, and it involves 2 steps. The first step is to create a function that defines the object type, and the second step involves creating an instance of that object using a new operator. So let's look at it. Function user, it's gonna have username and age, for instance, and then inside this function you need to use this keyword, and what this keyword means is that it is referring to the object being created. So you could say this.username, and it's gonna have username, and this.age is gonna be the age, the actual age value that will be passed in. So to create an instance, we need to do const user is equal to new user, and you pass in the actual values. So it could be like Tom, say 1, 2, 3, and age, let's say 25, and you could log all these properties to the console by saying like console.log user.name.username, and also you can log user.age like so. So you should be able to see the username and the age of this newly created object. So the third way of creating objects is by using Object.create method, and essentially this method creates a new object using an existing object as the prototype of the newly created object. So the first argument should be the prototype of the newly created object, and the second argument is actually optional. So it represents any additional properties that you want the newly created object to have. So let's take a look at it. Const say user is gonna have these properties. Username, for instance, let's say Jen 1, 2, 3, and say age, let's set it to 30. So now this is going to act as our prototype, and we can create an object called user by using Object.create method, and you pass in the prototype. So the first argument should be the prototype, and the second argument is optional, but it is an object that contains extra properties that you want this object to have. Let's say we want to have, say, is active property added to it, and it's gonna have a value set it to true. So we can log different values of this newly created user to the console by doing console.log user.isActive. Let's look at it. It should be true, and it is true. You can also get the username like so, Jen123. Great. So moving on to the last but definitely not the least way of creating objects in JavaScript is by using ES6 classes. So you could come and create your class, which is going to be a user class, and then this user class is going to have a constructor which contains username and age, for instance. And then here you also need to use the this keyword, and this is going to be this.username is equal to username, and this.age is equal to age passed in. Now you can use this class to instantiate a new object, to create a new object essentially, and you do something like const user is equal to new user, and then you pass in the actual values that you want this user to have, like say John Doe 1 2, and then say age is gonna be say 50, for instance. Now you can access all these properties of the user like so, and user.age, and you get your username and the age property on this object we just created. So this was the last method of creating objects in JavaScript. So in this video we looked at 4 different ways to create objects in JavaScript. We looked at object retros, which is basically the most common way of creating objects in JavaScript, and then we looked at the least common ways like constructor function, Object.create method, and then class functions. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you in the next one.